It began with a laugh. A sharp, dismissive laugh that carried across the quiet floor of a small-town American bank. For the man standing at the counter, that sound cut deeper than any insult. He had come with paperwork neatly prepared, dressed in his best shirt, the same one he wore on Sundays to church, and asked for something millions of Americans ask for every year: a loan to build a better life. But the bank manager, a man who saw himself as the gatekeeper of opportunity, didn't see a hardworking customer, didn't see a veteran, a father, a small business owner with years of sacrifice behind him. What he saw was a black man daring to request more than he believed he deserved. And so, instead of respect, he gave him laughter. The kind of laughter meant to shrink a person, to remind them of their place. Yet in that very moment, with every chuckle echoing in the walls of that office, the manager had no idea who he was speaking to. No idea what authority sat quietly on the other side of that desk, waiting to be revealed. One laugh, one moment of arrogance, and a bank manager's entire world collapsed. What he didn't know was that the man sitting across from him carried more power than he could imagine. But how did a simple loan request lead to humiliation, to revenge, and to a twist nobody saw coming? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The moment the laughter left the manager's lips, it set off a chain of events that neither he nor the bank could ever take back. This wasn't just about one man being denied a loan. It was about years of silent humiliation, a history of doors being shut in faces, and the way dignity can be stripped with nothing more than a chuckle. Yet what the manager never understood was that the man in front of him wasn't ordinary. He had lived through challenges that would have broken others. He had served a country that demanded sacrifice, and he carried with him something far heavier than the loan papers he placed on that desk. The question that remains is simple yet impossible to ignore. Who was he really? Why was he so casually dismissed? And what was inside the leather badge case that ended the laughter once and for all? For the next 90 minutes, we will unravel a story that began with humiliation and ended as a warning shot to America's financial system. The customer was a man in his mid-40s, a veteran who had worn the uniform of his country and carried scars both seen and unseen from years of service. He was a husband, a father, and a small business owner who believed in the values he had been taught since childhood. That if you worked hard, kept your word, and treated others with respect, the American dream would be within reach. He grew up in neighborhoods where opportunity was scarce, where banks were places you walked past but never walked into, but he pushed himself beyond those limitations. Night shifts, long hours, missed birthdays, and mounting bills never stopped him from pursuing something bigger. Every sacrifice he made was with one goal in mind: to build a future for his family, to show his children that their lives could be better than his own. It was with this dream in his heart that he walked into that bank, believing his effort would finally be rewarded. Across from him sat the bank manager, a man who saw the world through a different lens entirely. He had been raised in privilege, educated in circles where entitlement was never questioned, and given opportunities that others could only dream of. To him, the desk was more than a piece of furniture. It was a barrier that separated those who were worthy from those who were not. The suit he wore and the office he occupied filled him with a quiet arrogance, the certainty that he had the power to decide who advanced and who remained trapped. He believed that loans were not just financial tools, but symbols of belonging, of acceptance into a world where only certain people were welcomed. When the customer handed him those papers, he didn't see years of sacrifice or the weight of a family's future. He saw someone who, in his mind, didn't fit the mold. That was why, instead of respect, he responded with laughter. What neither man realized in that moment was that this meeting would not end the way either of them expected. It would not be another ordinary dismissal, another story of quiet rejection pushed into silence. That single exchange was about to ignite consequences neither could control. The bank manager believed he was simply turning away another hopeful borrower, but he was wrong. The customer was far more than what he appeared to be, and the badge he carried would change both of their lives forever. On that morning, the customer walked into the bank carrying a simple folder of documents. Inside were tax records, proof of income, contracts, and a detailed business plan he had spent weeks preparing. Every page represented hours of effort, nights spent calculating numbers at the kitchen table, and hopes for a future where his business could finally grow beyond survival. He greeted the receptionist with the same polite warmth he gave to everyone, then waited as the manager signaled him inside the office. He stepped across the polished floor with quiet confidence, believing this was the moment his years of hard work would finally open doors. Yet the welcome he received was not one of respect. The bank manager looked up with a faint smirk, a smile that carried no kindness, only dismissal. His tone was clipped, his manner impatient, as though he had already decided the outcome before a single word had been spoken. The customer explained his request clearly, laying out the numbers and presenting the paperwork, but the manager barely glanced at the documents. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and let out a chuckle, one sharp enough to cut through the quiet office. "You?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "Requesting a loan this size? You can't be serious." The words hung in the air like a slap. Staff nearby heard the laughter, though they pretended to stay focused on their screens. The condescension was unmistakable. It wasn't just a rejection of numbers. It was a rejection of the man himself, a message that no matter what he had accomplished, no matter what sacrifices he had made, he did not belong on the other side of that desk. In that instant, humiliation weighed heavy in the room, not because of the denial itself, but because of the way dignity was stripped away with a laugh. The bank manager didn't stop with a single chuckle. He leaned forward, tapping the papers with his pen as though they were little more than scraps. "I've seen applications like this before," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Men like you come in with dreams bigger than your means. You think owning a business makes you ready for responsibility. But this is a world for people with real resources, real backing. Tell me, do you honestly think a bank like this would risk that kind of money on someone like you?" His words weren't subtle. They were designed to sting, to remind the customer that no matter how hard he had worked, he was being judged not on merit, but on assumptions about his background. A faint laugh slipped from the desk behind him, then another from a staff member who quickly turned away. The sound wasn't loud, but it was enough to carry the same weight of dismissal. The customer sat still, his face calm, his eyes steady as though none of it reached him. But behind that quiet composure was something deeper: patience, resolve, and a silence that made the manager uneasy even as he continued mocking. "You should be grateful we even considered this," the manager said, shaking his head. "Maybe one day if you build something small and manageable, we'll think again. But this is far beyond your reach." The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavy with tension. Staff avoided eye contact, unsure whether to watch or pretend nothing was happening. And then, just as the manager turned to dismiss him completely, the customer moved slowly, deliberately. Without raising his voice, without showing anger, he reached inside his jacket. That's when he reached inside his jacket. The customer's hand moved with steady calm as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather case. He placed it carefully on the desk, not with force or anger, but with a deliberate quiet that spoke louder than words. When the case opened, the glint of metal caught the light. An official badge, the kind that carried weight far beyond the walls of any bank. The manager's smirk faltered instantly. His chuckle caught in his throat as his eyes fixed on the symbol staring back at him. Around the office, the low hum of activity stopped, conversations cut short, and the room was swallowed in silence. The staff who had once laughed under their breath now froze in place, their expressions shifting from amusement to shock. The badge didn't just rest on the desk. It filled the space with authority, with consequences that none of them had prepared for. The customer said nothing at first, letting the silence stretch long enough for the weight of that moment to sink in. The manager shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his earlier arrogance stripped away as quickly as it had appeared. That badge wasn't just an object of recognition. It was power, accountability, and justice embodied in one emblem, and the man who carried it had just turned the tables on an entire institution that believed it held all the control. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances, some retreating into the safety of their cubicles, others unable to look away. The air was charged with the realization that this was no ordinary customer, no ordinary loan request, and no ordinary meeting. Because what happened next exposed more than just arrogance, it exposed corruption. The silence in the office hung like a weight, pressing down on every person who had witnessed the moment. The bank manager blinked, his face pale as the reality of the badge on his desk sank in. The confidence that once dripped from every word seemed to drain out of him all at once. He cleared his throat, fumbling for words, his earlier arrogance replaced by hurried attempts to soften his tone. Perhaps I was too quick," he stammered, forcing a nervous smile. "We can take another look at your application, maybe reconsider the terms." The words sounded hollow, each one an obvious attempt to undo the damage that had already been done, but it was too late. The customer didn't raise his voice, didn't lash out, and yet the authority in his tone was unmistakable. Calmly, firmly, he reminded the manager that dignity was not his to give or take away, and that every action within these walls had consequences, far beyond what the staff realized. The employees who had laughed quietly just minutes before now sat frozen at their desks, their eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. What they had brushed off as another routine dismissal had transformed into something else entirely. They began to understand that the man in front of them wasn't powerless, wasn't just another name on a loan application. He was someone with the ability to hold the entire institution accountable. Whispers passed quietly between them, glances exchanged with unease, and the weight of shame began to spread across the room. They had underestimated him, judged him not on his worth, but on their assumptions, and now they were witnessing the cost of that misjudgment. For the first time, the manager looked smaller behind his desk, the badge on the polished surface casting a shadow larger than his authority ever could. The balance of power had shifted, and nothing in that bank would be the same again. The truth soon became clear. The man the bank manager had mocked was no ordinary customer. He was a federal investigator, an undercover regulator tasked with exposing discriminatory lending practices across the financial system. His loan request had not been random. It was deliberate, carefully designed to test whether this institution was operating within the boundaries of the law or continuing the long shadow of practices that had plagued American banking for generations. The badge he placed on the desk was more than a symbol of authority. It was evidence that the manager's behavior, his laughter, his condescension, were not private acts, but part of a much larger investigation. For years, federal agencies had gathered complaints from minority business owners who were denied opportunities despite being qualified. What happened in that office was not an isolated event. It was part of a pattern, one that reached back decades into the very foundation of American banking. Across the country, countless stories mirrored this moment. In the 1960s, maps were drawn in red lines that carved out neighborhoods where black families were denied mortgages and loans. The practice, known as redlining, locked entire communities out of financial growth, preventing them from buying homes or building businesses. Though laws had since changed, the legacy remained. Studies showed black entrepreneurs continued to be denied loans at higher rates than their white counterparts, often given worse terms, even when their financial records were solid. The laughter inside that bank office was not just an insult. It was a reflection of a much deeper wound. Archival reports, government hearings, and news headlines all pointed to the same truth. Financial institutions had long wielded power in ways that widened the gap between communities. This investigation was meant to pull back the curtain, to reveal whether those patterns still thrived in silence. And as the evidence began to unfold, one reality grew undeniable. What investigators found inside the bank went far beyond one racist laugh. As the investigation widened, the truth about the bank began to unravel piece by piece. What started as a single arrogant laugh was revealed to be part of a system built on exploitation. Documents uncovered hidden policies buried in the fine print, designed to funnel minority applicants into higher interest loans or deny them altogether under the guise of risk assessment. Families who had applied for mortgages were offered predatory terms that guaranteed failure. Small business owners found their applications rejected, only to learn later that identical proposals from others, with fewer qualifications, had sailed through with approval. Behind the polished glass walls and professional smiles was a machinery that quietly targeted those it deemed unworthy. It was not incompetence, it was intentional exclusion, and it had been perfected over years of practice. The customer's badge was no longer just an emblem of authority. It had become a key to unlocking evidence that exposed rot within the very heart of the institution. Employees, once loyal to the bank, began to break their silence. In confidential interviews, staff members admitted they had been instructed to treat certain applications differently, to flag names and addresses associated with minority neighborhoods for extra scrutiny. One former employee confessed that managers laughed privately about how easy it was to deny loans while keeping the numbers buried under technical language. Another revealed training sessions where they were told to focus on profitable demographics while discouraging others from applying altogether. When the story broke, headlines splashed across newspapers and television screens nationwide. Bank accused of discrimination in lending. Whistleblowers reveal predatory practices. Federal investigation targets financial institution. The institution that once projected stability and trust was now in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. The manager's laugh had sparked more than embarrassment. It had opened the floodgates to a scandal too large to contain. The scandal did not remain confined to headlines. It spilled into the courtroom, where the once confident bank manager now sat at the defendant's table, his polished demeanor replaced by a strained expression. Cameras captured every angle, the weight of public attention pressing down as he faced accusations that stretched far beyond one customer's complaint. In his opening statement, he insisted there had been a misunderstanding. He painted himself as a professional following procedure, suggesting that his laughter had been misinterpreted, that he bore no prejudice and had simply been doing his job. His words, though carefully chosen, rang hollow in the face of the growing evidence. Across the aisle, prosecutors rose with files thick with documentation, prepared to reveal the hidden practices that had long been shielded from scrutiny. Each word spoken carried the weight of accountability, building tension in the room as spectators waited to see if justice would finally strike where it had so often been absent. Then came the bombshells. Prosecutors introduced emails exchanged between managers, mocking applicants from minority neighborhoods and celebrating higher profits from loans designed to fail. Internal memos were read aloud, instructing staff to push risky clients toward unfavorable terms while ensuring that wealthier, more privileged applicants received fast-tracked approvals. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as page after page revealed a culture of bias dressed in the language of policy. But perhaps most powerful of all were the voices of those directly affected. Business owners took the stand, their voices shaking as they recounted how their dreams had been cut short, their families burdened with debt, their hope turned to despair after being rejected or exploited by the very institution meant to support them. Each testimony drew the public closer to outrage, a shared recognition that this was more than a single man's arrogance. It was systemic discrimination, laid bare for the world to see. The courtroom became more than a place of law. It became a stage where truth could no longer be denied. As the trial unfolded, a deeper truth began to emerge, one that shifted the story from a single office to an entire system. The customer, the man whose dignity had been mocked, had not chosen this bank at random. For months, he had been quietly observing, returning under different pretenses, testing applications and monitoring outcomes. Every visit, every rejection, every dismissive remark had been carefully recorded as part of an investigation far larger than anyone in that courtroom initially realized. He was not merely exposing one arrogant manager. He was gathering evidence against an institution that had perfected discrimination under the cover of professional respectability. His presence at that desk had been the final test, the moment designed to confirm what the data already suggested. that this bank was engaged in practices that targeted and excluded minorities while pretending to uphold fairness. The badge on the table was not only a revelation of identity, but the culmination of months of hidden work. But the twist reached even higher than one branch or one manager. The documents revealed that this bank was not acting alone. It was part of a nationwide pattern, a network of financial institutions where executives at the top sanctioned policies that placed profit over principle. Emails showed collaboration between branches, strategies designed to maximize earnings by exploiting the very people they were supposed to serve. The arrogance of the manager's laugh now carried a different meaning. It wasn't only personal prejudice, it was the casual face of an entire system confident it would never be caught. And as the courtroom absorbed this revelation, the narrator's words hung heavy with finality. The manager wasn't just laughing at one man, he was laughing at the law itself. When the verdict came, it was as though the weight of months of outrage had finally pressed down on the bank manager. He was stripped of his title, removed from the position he had once used as a platform for arrogance, and faced federal charges that carried the possibility of years behind bars. Gone was the smug confidence, the laughter that once filled his office. Now he was reduced to a man explaining himself before the law, his reputation shattered, his future uncertain. The courtroom where he had once tried to mask his actions as professional procedure had become the stage of his undoing. His fall was swift, but it carried the message that authority misused would not remain unchecked. Across the nation, his story became a cautionary tale of how power, when exercised without fairness, can crumble under the force of accountability. The institution itself did not escape untouched. The investigation expanded beyond the manager's actions, uncovering systematic practices that led to one of the largest financial penalties in years. The bank was fined billions, money that could not erase the harm, but symbolized a reckoning long overdue. Regulators forced sweeping changes to lending policies, mandating stricter oversight and equal opportunity measures that could no longer be ignored. Customers who had once felt powerless began to rally together, forming groups, sharing their stories, and demanding reform not just in this bank but across the financial sector. Public anger turned into collective action, a call for fairness that echoed in town halls, on television screens, and in congressional hearings. What began as one man walking into a bank with a folder of documents had transformed into a movement that forced an industry to confront its prejudice. The laugh that started it all had now been silenced by the voices of millions demanding justice. For the black customer, the ending of this story was not defined by the laughter that tried to reduce him, nor by the humiliation that manager attempted to place on his shoulders. His story turned toward victory, a quiet but powerful reminder that dignity, when defended, can outlast arrogance. In the months that followed, his small business began to thrive. Freed from the limitations imposed by bias, he secured the resources he needed through channels that recognized his worth. What had once been a modest operation grew steadily, employing others in his community, creating opportunity where there had once been scarcity. Each step forward became a symbol of resilience, not only for his family, but for countless others who saw in his journey the reflection of their own struggles. The same man who had been laughed at for daring to dream was now proof that perseverance and justice could open doors once thought sealed shut. His victory reached beyond profits or growth. It was deeply personal, rooted in the promise he had made to himself and his family, that hard work would not be wasted, that sacrifice would not be ignored. The humiliation meant to break him instead revealed the truth, and in doing so, forced change on a system that for too long had hidden behind polite denial and quiet exclusion. His triumph carried a message to others who had been dismissed, who had been told no without cause, that their worth was not determined by the arrogance of gatekeepers, but by the undeniable strength of their own persistence. What was meant to humiliate him instead exposed the truth and changed the system. The story of the black customer and the bank manager is more than a confrontation inside one office. It is a reflection of a struggle that has stretched across generations in America, where dignity and respect have too often been withheld from those who earned them. The promise of the American dream has always rested on the belief that hard work and sacrifice could open doors, but for countless men and women, those doors were bolted shut by systems that judged not by merit, but by prejudice. In one room, a laugh attempted to disguise injustice, to reduce a man's worth to a stereotype. Yet that laugh became the spark that revealed a truth many already knew, but few could prove, that even in modern times, the weight of history still shaped the way opportunity was granted or denied. The badge on the desk was not just a revelation of authority, it was a reminder that justice, when it comes, often arrives in silence before it speaks loudly enough to shake an entire institution. This story leaves behind questions that reach beyond one bank, one trial, or one man. How many others have faced the same humiliation in quiet offices, their dreams dismissed with a smirk? How many families have been forced to abandon their hopes because those in power decided they did not belong? And how many times has laughter disguised injustice, turning dignity into mockery? As the nation reflects on what unfolded, another question rises to the surface. How many more badges will it take before equality is more than a promise? The story of one black customer and one arrogant bank manager is not just history. It is a reminder of the work still left to be done, a reminder that respect should never be optional, and that the American dream must belong to all, not just to some. From the very beginning, this story carried the weight of humiliation, born from a laugh meant to strip away dignity. What the bank manager never expected was that the customer sitting across from him was far more than he appeared to be. With the quiet reveal of a badge, the balance of power shifted. What was once arrogance turned into fear, and what began as a dismissal inside a single office became the downfall of a man and the unraveling of a system. The manager lost his position, faced federal charges, and stood as a symbol of how arrogance can collapse under truth. The bank itself paid billions in fines, was forced to change its practices, and could no longer hide behind polite excuses. And at the heart of it all, the black customer emerged not as a victim but as a victor, his business thriving, his resilience exposing injustice, and his perseverance changing the system. What do you think? Was justice really served in this case, or was the punishment too light? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story shocked you, wait until you hear what happened in our next case. Subscribe so you don't miss it.